My name is Mara Walker, and I'm 34 years old. 3 weeks before Christmas, a text meant for my sister landed on my phone by accident, and that's how I found out I'd be spending the holidays running a house full of 5 children while the rest of my family sailed the Caribbean. My mother had already told everyone I'd agreed to it. Nobody had actually asked me. It was sitting right there, the fourth line of a cruise itinerary, wedged between a shuttle time and the dinner reservations. Mara has the kids, December 22nd through 27th, confirmed. So I rearranged my own plans, quietly, completely, in writing. What my mother found on my porch 3 days before Christmas made her scream loud enough that the neighbor across the street turned all the way around in his own driveway. And that was before she found out about the plane ticket. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where buried grudges finally surface and the people everyone took for granted get to tell it their way. Drop where you're watching from tonight in the comments. And if you've ever been the relative your family simply assumes will say yes, hit subscribe. This one's going to feel uncomfortably familiar. Let me describe what I was to my family in numbers, since that's my job. I run a small tax office in a town called Beckett Falls, Ohio. My name's on the door. 11 years of clients who bring me cookies every April. I bought my own house at 29, a brick ranch with a porch swing, and I was proud of it for exactly 1 week, which is how long it took my mother to start calling it the spare house. Spare bedroom for visiting cousins. Spare driveway for my brother's boat. Spare aunt for every date night, every stomach bug, every school closure that didn't line up with somebody's shift. I filed the whole family's taxes free every spring. I hosted Easter because my kitchen was bigger. I kept a drawer stocked with juice boxes and spare pajamas in 3 kid sizes. I need to say this clearly. I adore those 5 children completely. Ava's drawings live on my fridge. This was never about them. It was about the plain fact that in 10 years, not one person in my family had ever asked, "Are you free?" Because the answer had already been decided somewhere above my head, in the office of the woman who ran our family like a shipping warehouse. My mother, Sandra, is 61, razor-sharp, and has never once lost an argument with a calendar. Whenever I tried to put a number on it out loud, the hosting, the sitting, the free tax returns, she had one response, delivered with a gentle squeeze of my wrist. "It's not work when it's family, honey." I believed that sentence for 20 years. There was an envelope sitting unopened in my kitchen drawer for 3 of those years. Remember that, it matters later. In my family, every conversation ran through my mother first. We didn't have a group chat so much as a switchboard. My sister Chelsea didn't call me, she called Mom, and Mom called me, and somewhere in the relay the message got edited for content. Danny's news arrived pre-spun. My news left pre-softened. Mom logged the whole operation in a leather planner she'd carried since the 90s, birthdays and grudges recorded in the same blue ink. If you wanted to know anything about anyone, you asked Sandra, which meant you got Sandra's version. My father, Walt, 63, is a gentle man built out of apologies. His entire vocabulary for conflict was one sentence: "Your mother means well." My sister Chelsea, 31, has 3 kids under 9. Her husband Tyler travels constantly. My brother Danny, 36, and his wife Kate have 2 little ones and a gift for arriving right after the tables are set. None of them are villains, I need you to hear that. They were tired people handed a convenient story their whole adult lives. Mara's got it. Mara doesn't mind. And the only person who ever actually delivered that story was the one person we all actually talked to. Every thread of this family ran through one set of hands. That's not a family tree, that's a fuse box. In late November, without meaning to, my mother sent a spark down the wrong wire. Here's the oldest entry in the ledger. I was 15. The whole family took a week-long trip to Disney World, my parents, Chelsea, Danny, and aunt and uncle, a caravan in matching t-shirts. I stayed home and watched 4 young cousins, ages 2 through 9, alone for 7 straight days. You might wonder how a 15-year-old ends up with that job. The truth is, she doesn't end up with it. She gets announced into it. My mother told a room full of relatives it was already decided. Mara volunteered to stay back. She's never been much for rides anyway. I stood in the kitchen doorway listening to my own life get narrated to my aunt, complete with a personality I didn't actually have. I loved rides. Nobody had asked me about them since I was 14. But here's the arithmetic every kid in a house like. Mine learns, correct her in front of everyone and you're difficult. Say nothing and you're wonderful. They brought me back a keychain. My mother told that story glowingly for years. Mara's just built different. Some girls are born responsible. As if she discovered a new species, a daughter who came factory installed with no plans of her own to interrupt. A lie needs a date on it to become real. That one was still a rehearsal. The real one came later, with dates attached. And it turns out a keychain is exactly what 20 years of surrendered Christmases look like, compressed small enough to fit in your hand. There was exactly one person in my family who never touched the switchboard. My grandmother, Nora, my mother's mother, though you'd never guess it. Nora had crossed the Atlantic at 19, alone, from a fishing village called Dingle on the coast of County Kerry, and carried that harbor town in her voice until the day she died. She used to say the sea got her to America, and stubbornness handled the rest. Nora was the only adult who ever asked me a question and actually waited for the answer. Whenever the family handed me another job, she'd find me alone in the kitchen after and ask, quiet as a secret, "And what do you want, Mara, love?" I never had an answer ready. That's the part that shames me now. She died when I was in my late 20s. At the reading of what little she'd left, there was an envelope with my name on it in her slanted convent school handwriting. Inside, $600 in soft, worn 20s, a postcard of Dingle Harbor painted boats, hills so green they looked argued over, and 4 words. For your someday, love. That envelope sat in my kitchen drawer under the takeout menus for 3 straight years. I couldn't spend it. Spending it meant admitting I had a someday at all, and I was already fully booked being everyone else's weekday. But I always knew exactly where it was. The way you know where the fire extinguisher lives. The spark came on a Tuesday night in late November at 9:42. I was at my kitchen table with cold tea and a client's shoebox of receipts when my phone buzzed. Mom. A long message, clearly composed with care, clearly not meant for me. The cruise itinerary. 6 adults, Mom, Dad, Chelsea and Tyler, Danny and Kate. 5 nights, Caribbean, sailing out of Florida on December 22nd, back the 27th. Shuttle times, dinner seatings, Dad's good blazer. And there on the 4th line, my entire holiday already decided, Mara has the kids. December 22nd to 27th. Confirmed. I read it 3 times. I actually turned around to check if there was another Mara sitting behind me. 5 children, 6 days. Confirmed, a word I use professionally, meaning both sides signed off. I set the phone down carefully, the way you'd set down something ticking. Before I could decide what to feel, it buzzed again. A second message, same wrong thread. Don't mention the cruise to her yet. You know how she gets. I sat with that for a long time. 34 years old, and I learned my actual role in this family from a typo. I wasn't a sister or a daughter or even a babysitter. I was a logistics problem with feelings managed on a need-to-know basis. The tea went cold. Somewhere across town, my mother was finishing plans for my holiday. And in my kitchen drawer, under the menus, I swear that envelope got louder. I called her the next morning. I'd rehearsed calm, reasonable sentences in the shower, the car, my desk between appointments. I managed exactly one line. Mom, I saw the text. You can't just schedule me. What came back was a masterclass, and I want to walk you through it, because if you grew up with a Sandra, you'll recognize every move. First, the reframe, honey, it's not babysitting when it's your own blood. Second, the audit of my life. What else would you even be doing? Third, the appeal to the season. Christmas is for children, Mara. Adults make it happen, we doing tremendous work, given the 6 adults about to make Christmas happen from a pool deck. Fourth, the closer, soft as a lullaby. You're so good with them. It's a compliment, sweetheart. By minute 6, I heard something that scared me more than anything she'd said. My own voice, apologizing reflexively. Sorry, I only meant. The exact verbal curtsy I'd been performing since I was 15. I hung up having agreed to nothing and refused nothing, which in my family's arithmetic rounds up to yes. That night I did what I always do when the world stops making sense. I ran the numbers. I pulled 10 years of old planners off my shelf and went through every holiday like a forensic accountant, line by line, highlighter in hand. 9 of the last 10 Christmases, hosted by me or spent watching children while their parents attended parties I heard about later. Every Easter since I'd bought the ranch house. Most Thanksgivings. Every date night, every sick day, every school closure. One column, what I'd given, us. Our column, what I'd actually been paid. And I don't mean money. I mean invitations that were really assignments, compliments that were really performance reviews. You're so good with them. She's just built different. A keychain. I do taxes for a living. I know unbilled hours when I see them, and I was looking at 2 decades of them single-spaced. Somewhere around midnight, the feeling I'd been circling all day finally landed, and it surprised me, something quieter than rage. Clarity. The kind you get when a client finally hands you the real books. My family didn't have a babysitting problem. They had a billing problem, and I was the department that never sent an invoice. I closed the planner. I have never felt calmer in my life. If you've ever been the one everybody counts on, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Stay with me. My mother was about to learn what confirmed means when it isn't hers to write. Thanksgiving came 2 days later, at my parents' house. I waited until every plate was full and every adult was seated, because information delivered to a full room at once can't be edited on the way to its recipients. Before anyone locks in plans, I said, level as I could manage, I need everyone to know I'm not available December 22nd through the 27th. Forks paused. Kate glanced at Danny. Chelsea glanced at Mom, and my mother didn't even look up from the cranberry sauce. She smiled her hostess smile, the one with no weather behind it, and said to the table as if I were a radio in another room, "Ignore her. She always says that." The table laughed. Kindly, even. My uncle chuckled into his stuffing. Kate said something about how they'd never survive the holidays without me. The conversation rolled onto the rolls, and my announcement, clear adult words, spoken in a row in front of witnesses, dissolved like sugar in warm water. I sat there watching my own no get downgraded to a mood in real time. I said it once more, quieter. I'm serious this time. My mother patted my hand without pausing her sentence to my aunt. I skipped dessert. I had an email to write. I drove home and sat down at my laptop like I was taking the witness stand. If the spoken word couldn't survive the switchboard, fine. I work in a profession where spoken words mean nothing and the written record means everything. 6 recipients: Mom, Dad, Chelsea, Tyler, Danny, Kate. 1 thread. No relay possible. Subject line, December 22nd, 27th. I kept the body short, because short can't be edited into something else on the way to somebody's ear. I wrote that I loved them, and I loved the kids. I wrote that I would not be available December 22nd through the 27th, that I wasn't asking permission, and that this wasn't up for discussion. So no one would be stranded, I attached 3 childcare options I'd personally called and confirmed had holiday availability. I read it twice, changed nothing, and hit send at 9:58. Then I sat back and felt the strangest thing. The floor didn't open. Lightning declined to strike. For the first time in my life, I'd put something true about myself in writing that my mother couldn't retell, reframe, or pat gently on the hand. It existed now, time-stamped, sitting in 6 inboxes. I made tea. I slept 9 hours. Clinically, the best night of sleep I'd had in years. The replies started at dawn. Danny first, 6:40 a.m., clearly typing from the gym. Lol, okay, drama queen. See you on the 22nd. Kate never replied at all. The message just sat there, seen, like a package nobody would sign for. My father called and left a voicemail that was 90% throat clearing and ended with "Your mother means well." Chelsea called on her lunch break, a toddler negotiating loudly behind her, and her voice wasn't angry, it was exhausted, which is worse. "Mara, it's one Christmas. Why are you making it a thing?" I told her I'd made it a thing in writing precisely so it wouldn't turn into a scene, and that the sitter list would cost less than her checked luggage. And then Chelsea said the sentence that rearranged the whole board. "I don't get it. Mom told us back in October you'd already volunteered. Said it was your idea, so the rest of us could finally get a trip. That's why nobody asked you. We thought it was settled." October, the cruise had been booked in October. I ran the timeline the way I'd run an audit. There was no misunderstanding at the bottom of this. There was a transaction. My mother had spent my name like a gift card, told 6 people I'd offered something I'd never heard of, and sat on that lie for 6 weeks. Don't mention it to her yet, right up until the suitcases were due at my door. "That's not what happened, Chels," I said. "I found out from a text meant for you." A long pause, a baby babbled. "Mom wouldn't just make that up," Chelsea said, slower now, like someone rereading a receipt. My mother didn't answer the email. She answered in person, 3 days later at my office, carrying a curry box, because Sandra Walker has never once arrived anywhere without a prop. She set the box on my desk like an opening chess move and told my receptionist to hold my calls. Then she did something I didn't expect. She cried, real ones, not the hostess kind. She told me about being 14 when her own mother, my Nora, came down with rheumatic fever, and how she, the eldest of 5, ran that kitchen for 2 years. Lunches packed, brothers bathed, dinner at 6. Nobody ever asked me either, she said. For one dangerous second, the whole room tilted because there it was, the original invoice, the debt that started this ledger. My mother had been me before there was a me. I almost reached for her hand. And then she straightened her coat, and the shine came back into her eyes, and she delivered the line she'd actually driven over to say. Being needed is being loved, Mara. Family is what I built instead of a life, and it's the best thing I ever built. One day you'll thank me for it. She stood, patted the box once, and left, having reclassified my objection as ingratitude. The box had lemon bars inside. My favorite. That's the thing about my mother, the ammunition was always something you loved. That night, I finally opened the envelope. When I slid my thumb under the flap, the paper came apart soft as cloth. $600 in worn 20s, smelling faintly of rose water. The postcard painted boats, hills so green they looked argued over, and her slanted handwriting. For your someday, love. I let myself cry for about 90 seconds, timed against the kettle. Then I opened my laptop and built my someday like a case file. A flight out of Columbus, connecting through Chicago, then across the Atlantic to Shannon, departing December 22nd at 6:55 a.m. a bus down the coast road to Dingle. A bed and breakfast 2 streets up from the harbor, run by a woman named Eileen whose page promised, "You'll want the front room, the sea's in it." Here's the detail I want you to hold on to because everything later stands on it. I booked the flight non-refundable on purpose. $40 cheaper, yes, but that isn't why. I know myself. I'm the woman who folded for 20 consecutive Christmases, and I know exactly what sound my own resolve makes right before it cracks. So I built a door that only locked from the outside. No refunds, no changes, no exit ramp. Nora's 20s covered most of it. I covered the rest. When the confirmation landed, I printed it on paper, like a vow, and stood in my kitchen holding my own someday in both hands. I pinned the boarding pass to the refrigerator, and I need to explain what that fridge meant because it was never just an appliance, it was a bulletin board of everyone else's life. School calendars, Chelsea's kids' art, a save the date for a wedding I was apparently already driving 4 children to. I cleared a space dead center and pinned the pass under the strongest magnet I owned. Columbus, Shannon, Walker/Mara. December 22nd, 6:55 a.m., the first thing on that fridge in 10 years with my name on it as the passenger, and not the driver. 2 days later, Chelsea stopped by to return my slow cooker, kids buckled in the running car outside. She walked in mid-sentence, then saw it and stopped talking. She stood there, slow cooker still in her arms, and read my boarding pass twice. I watched her face move through surprise, then arithmetic, then something like witnessing. "You're actually serious," she said. "I've never been more serious about anything," I told her. She didn't argue. That's the part I keep coming back to. My tired little sister looked at one piece of paper with a departure time on it and understood in 4 seconds what 3 weeks of my actual words hadn't landed. That night, my phone lit up. "What did your email actually say? Forward it to me." Somewhere across town, the switchboard had just lost its first subscriber. My mother, meanwhile, had stopped arguing with me entirely, which I'd expect from a strategist. When the defendant won't settle, you stop negotiating and start seating the jury. That Sunday, 3 separate women found me by the coat rack at church to tell me how wonderful I was. What a gift, how Sandra just glowed talking about her Mara taking the children for cruise week. The pastor's wife squeezed my arm. "She tells everyone you're the rock of that family. Do you see the architecture forming?" My mother had told the whole congregation, the whole extended family, half of Beckett Falls, that I was keeping those kids, announced as settled fact, exactly like Disney World, except now the stakes were 5 children and an actual sailing date. Every retelling poured another inch of concrete around my no. If I got on that plane, I wouldn't just be declining a babysitting shift. I'd be the woman who abandoned 5 babies at Christmas after promising the whole town she wouldn't, because the promise had been made publicly, extensively, and entirely in my name by somebody else. Paper trails only convince honest people. For everyone else, there would have to be an empty porch. My father came alone on a Thursday, which had never happened. He sat at my kitchen table, cap in both hands, drinking coffee, visibly miserable about the errand we both understood he'd been sent on. "Your mother means well," he opened then, gently, the ask. It's only 5 days, kiddo, just this once more. I want to be honest, that one nearly worked. Not the guilt, not the church ladies this. A kind old man asking softly. Rage you can wall out. Gentleness slips in under the door. I felt the old reflexive yes rising, and then over his shoulder I saw the refrigerator. I took a breath and did the math out loud, kindly, for the gentlest man in my family. Dad, this once more. I've been hearing that for 20 years, I counted. It's never once, and it's never in my direction. He looked at his coffee. I told him about the sitters, the email, the plan. My father is not a fast man, but he isn't a foolish one. He stood in my doorway a long moment, and then said the strangest, best thing he's ever said to me. Nora would have liked this, he murmured, not quite meeting my eyes. Then he went home. I later heard I'd apparently seemed busy. The final stretch was the strangest of all. My mother simply proceeded as though reality would fold before she did. A week out, she emailed the final itinerary, and there it still sat, line 4 untouched. Mara has the kids. Confirmed. She called me twice that week, and both times, instead of the fight I braced for, she just talked calmly about the children's food preferences. No acknowledgement of my no, no mention of the email. Just gentle administrative instructions, in the tone of a woman briefing a subordinate she trusts. Talking to my mother that December felt like arguing with a printed calendar. You could say anything to it, and it would still read December 22nd, Mara has the kids. I understand now what she was doing, because it had worked her entire life, maintaining the reality she preferred until everyone else moved into it. Most people fold in the face of that much certainty. It's cheaper than the fight. Then, on December 21st, at 4 in the afternoon, my doorbell rang, and my mother stood on my porch with 2 small rolling suitcases, one unicorn, one dinosaur, which she set down side by side like a delivery. She didn't ask to come in, she's never had a key, and some part of her knew that porch was the absolute edge of her jurisdiction. We'll drop the rest tomorrow at 7, she said, already turning. Don't be dramatic. Here's the thing about people who have never once heard your no. Eventually you have to show them. If you've ever had to show someone, tell me below. The airport comes next. I stood behind my own door and looked at those suitcases through the glass, luggage for children whose parents had been told, by someone they trusted, that this door would definitely open. That's the moment this stopped being about me. I called Chelsea. I could hear her television, her dishwasher, her whole ordinary life in the background. Chels, listen to me like a sister, not like mom's daughter. Tomorrow at 7, do not bring your kids here. I will be on a plane. My flight leaves at 6:55. This isn't a bluff, and it isn't a negotiation with a second round. Nobody will be home. Please protect your kids from this plan. Silence except a cartoon behind her. Then quietly, Mom swore you'd fold. Not you'll fold, you'd fold, past tense. A forecast already circulated. That's when I finally saw the whole shape of it. My no had never entered the family's operating reality because the switchboard had been broadcasting its own weather report the entire time. She'll cave, she always caves. I know she did, I said. She's been wrong since November. Another silence. Then my sister, exhausted, tethered to a diaper bag half the year, said the first fully load-bearing thing anyone in my family had said all month. Okay, the kids stay with me. Go. At 10 that night, headlights swung back into my driveway, my mother, returning for the suitcases, because Chelsea had told her to bring them home. I braced for the storm. Instead, she sat down on my porch steps in her good coat and patted the space beside her. I sat. She looked out at the dark street and told me about her Aunt Lorna, a name I'd heard maybe twice in my life. Never married, no kids, 40 years at the county records office. Every Christmas of my childhood, my mother said, Lorna ran the kitchen, watched us cousins, sewed the pageant costumes, never missed one, not once in 50 years. That woman was the glue of our whole family. Her voice went warm. She died in February, alone in that little apartment. It took 4 days before anyone thought to call. She let that sit, then turned to me, eyes shining, and delivered what she genuinely believed was the moral. And at her funeral, the whole family came, every single one packed into those pews. That's a life, Mara, that's what it adds up to. I looked at my mother and understood, finally, that she had never once been lying to me. She had stood in that empty apartment. She had sat in that packed church. And she had done the only math she'd ever been taught, and arrived, sincerely, at worth it. My mother had learned exactly the wrong lesson at that funeral, and she'd been quietly teaching it to me my whole life. Mom, I said gently. Who called Lorna in February? She looked at me. She didn't answer. She picked up the suitcases and drove home. I didn't sleep much. I sat at my kitchen table with two dead women for company, and they were good company. Aunt Lorna, 50 Christmases of glue, 4 days of nobody calling. My own Nora, 1 suitcase out of Dingle Harbor at 19, who still found room to ask a quiet girl in a kitchen what she wanted. 2 women, no husbands, no children of their own. 2 very different ways it can go. Around 1 in the morning, my thumb did something my brain hadn't fully authorized, opened the airline app, hovered over the cancellation number. I watched my own hand do it from somewhere outside myself. Because here's what nobody tells you about the night before you keep a promise to yourself. It isn't the guilt that nearly gets you. It's the gravity. 20 years of orbit doesn't release its grip just because you printed a boarding pass. Then I got up, walked to the fridge, and took down Nora's postcard. Painted boats. Green hills. For your someday love, some inheritances are money. Mine was a question asked once by the only person who ever waited for the answer, and it had been waiting 19 years for me to give it one. I closed the app. I set the phone to charge in the hallway, out of reach of my own weakness, and set 2 alarms for 4:15. I slept like a woman with a door that finally locked. December 22nd, 5:40 in the morning. My house was dark except the stove light. My suitcase, 1 bag, medium, stood by the door. The taxi's headlights swung up the street right on schedule. I did the kind of last walkthrough you do, touching things, locking the back door, straightening the bare magnet where the boarding pass used to hang. It was folded in quarters in my coat pocket now, warm as a passport to another life. My phone had been going since 5:15. Mom missed call, Danny mom, an unfamiliar number, mom, voicemail. Mom, 7 calls from her alone by the time the taxi idled at the curb. I silenced the ringer, but I did not power the phone off. Turning it off would have been hiding, and I was finished hiding. I'd resigned from that job in writing weeks earlier. There's a real difference between running away and simply departing. The difference is paperwork, and mine was immaculate. As the driver loaded my bag, 1 text came through from Chelsea, and I read it standing in my dark driveway, breath fogging in the cold. Kids are with me. Go. I looked back at my house once. Porch dark, suitcases gone, fridge holding nothing now but a magnet and empty space. Then I climbed into the taxi and said, out loud for the first time in 34 years, "The airport, please, international." Here's what nobody tells you about a first real stand. Your body never gets the memo. My mind had been made up since November, but at check-in, my hands shook so badly I dropped my passport twice, and the agent kindly pretended not to notice. 20 years of training doesn't die quietly. It dies in a security line at 6 in the morning, asking you who exactly you think you are. At the gate, I did the one thing I'd promised myself I would do. There's a version of this story where I slip onto that plane dodging calls, and I refuse to be her. I called my mother back. She picked up before the first ring finished. I kept my voice in the register I reserve for audited clients. Factual, warm, immovable. Mom, I'm at the airport. I told you in writing 3 weeks ago. The kids are safe. They're with their own parents, and the sitter list has been in your inbox for a month. Nobody is stranded except by choice. What came back started as fury and slid into inventory. She named the children one by one like a spell. Then, their little faces on Christmas morning, Mara. I watched a plane pull back from the next gate, slow and cert. I've loved their little faces for free for 10 years, I said. And I'm going. I hung up before she could reload. The gate filled with the humanity of an early international connection, college kids asleep on backpacks, a young mother pacing a fussy infant. I sat still, boarding pass folded in my hand. The baby a few rows over really got going, and I caught the mother's eye and felt the old reflex rising right on schedule. Get up, offer to hold the baby, fix it, be useful. I nearly did. But here's what I actually did instead. I smiled and said, "You're doing great," and stayed exactal. Why in my seat? It sounds like nothing. It was one of the hardest things in this whole story. Beside me, an older woman with a carry-on full of knitting asked where I was headed. Ireland, my grandmother's village. She left there at 19 and nobody in the family's ever gone back. Her needles paused. Alone, she asked. Alone, I said. She went back to her knitting with a small, satisfied nod like a judge closing a case. Good girl, long overdue, I'd say. Now I have to tell you about 7 a.m. on my own porch, because Chelsea told me the whole thing later, twice, the second time with a glass of wine and full sound effects. At 6:58, my mother's van pulled into my driveway. Mom driving, Danny riding shotgun with his coffee, 5 children buckled in the back in Christmas pajamas, because the actual plan had been to deposit all 5 kids at my door, bags in hand, right on schedule, as though my no had simply been a weather forecast that never panned out. Chelsea was there too, in her own car, not to drop off her kids, never intended to, not after our call but, in her words, because somebody needed to witness this. My mother marched up my walk and rang the doorbell like a landlord. Rang it again. She'd heard the word boarding out of my own mouth barely an hour earlier and driven over anyway, because in her world a doorbell has always outranked an airline. The porch light was off. Every light was off. My car sat cold in the driveway. I'd taken a taxi specifically so its absence would say what I needed it to say. She isn't running an errand, she's gone. A third ring, knuckles on the door. Mara. Danny checked his phone. My mother stepped back, looked up at the dark, silent house, and it began, finally, to land, the itinerary, the church announcements, the suitcases, 20 years of assumed yesies, all of it hitting the one variable Sandra Walker had never once budgeted for, a no that stayed a no even after the doorbell rang. What actually broke her wasn't the silence at the door. It was the email that landed at exactly 7:00 a.m. I'd scheduled it the night before. One message hit 6 inboxes at once. As stated on November 22nd, I am unavailable December 22nd through 27th. My flight departed at 6:55. The sitter list is in your inbox. I love you all. M. Danny's phone chimed on my porch. He read it, and Chelsea says his face moved through something between a flinch and, against his will, respect. Mom, she's gone, like actually airborne gone. And my mother, composed, church coat, never a hair out of place Sandra, took the phone, read that single line and came apart in my front yard. What, this can't be happening. Loud enough that a neighbor down the street, out with his coffee and a tangle of Christmas lights, turned all the way around. She said it again, quieter, to the dark house itself, as though it might still negotiate. This can't be happening, she doesn't do this. And then Danny actually scrolled down. All the way down for the first time. The November email, the dates, the sitters, the line, I am not asking permission. He read it standing right there on my porch while his mother pressed a hand flat against her chest, and Chelsea says he finally looked up and said the truest thing he's ever said. Mom, she told us in writing 3 weeks ago. A pause. You said she'd fold, she always folds. Everyone just knew what you'd said. The van full of children idled in my driveway. The cruise sailed at 4 that afternoon, with or without them. And I was somewhere over Indiana with a ginger ale, finally off the clock. But I owe you the true climax, and it happened 40 minutes before that porch scene, and this part belongs entirely to me. 6:10 a.m., right as they called pre-boarding, my phone lit up one final time. Mom, I answered, I want that on the record, I didn't dodge the last call. I took it standing at the window with the plane huge and pale in the glass, because whatever came next, I was going to be a woman who faced it. Her voice was different this time, not the hostess, not the strategist, cracked open. The cruise leaves at 4, she said. Everything is paid for, Mara, everything is arranged. A ragged breath. You are ruining this family's Christmas. The gate agent called Group 1. I watched the jet bridge shudder against the plane, and then my mother played the last card in the deck, the oldest card there is, and her voice didn't rise when she played it. It dropped flat and final, the exact sound of a door closing. If you get on that plane, Mara, don't bother coming back to this family. There it was. The sentence my entire life had been arranged around never having to hear. The fear of it had run my calendar for 20 years. Standing there at the glass, I finally heard it out loud, in open air instead of locked inside my chest, and it was so much smaller out loud. Just one sentence, from one frightened woman, standing on a porch that wasn't hers anymore. I said, and my voice came out steadier than I'd ever heard it. For 20 years, I bought my seat at your table by disappearing. If that seat only exists when I'm useful, it was never really mine. I love you, I'm boarding now. I hung up, I did not power the phone off. I let it ring in my pocket the entire length of that jet bridge. I wanted to feel exactly what the choice cost. The scanner beeped. The flight attendant said, "Welcome aboard." Both things were true at once. Seat 31A window. We climbed out over Ohio, and I watched my whole world shrink into a quilt of white fields and gray roads. And I cried. I want to be honest about that. because the internet version of this story usually ends with a smirk and a cocktail, and the true version is that I cried from wheels up until the drink cart reached row 31. Not pretty crying, the kind that empties out a storage unit. The woman beside me, a stranger in a Christmas sweater, wordlessly handed over a travel pack of tissues without asking a single question, which I've since decided is the purest form of love available between strangers at 35,000 feet. Because here's what I was actually crying out, not regret. Grief. There's a version of me that got to have a mother who simply asked. I'd been waiting 34 years for her to show up. Somewhere over Indiana, I quietly buried her instead. Grief is the receipt you get for that. When it passed, somewhere over the Atlantic, what was left underneath was so quiet I almost didn't recognize it. No lists, no timers, no one about to ring my doorbell. My phone was in airplane mode, and for the first time in 34 years, so was I. I ordered the ginger ale. I slept over an ocean without setting an alarm for anybody else, and I woke up to green. At baggage claim in Shannon, phone freshly powered on, I had 11 missed calls and one voicemail that mattered. Chelsea. Okay, update from the front. Kate and Danny made their flight. The little ones already love kids camp. Tyler and I ate the cost of our tickets. We're home, and honestly, it's kind of nice. A pause. Mom and Dad didn't go. The cruise line wouldn't refund. She's been on the phone with them all morning. A longer pause. And Mara, while I was looking up their number for her texts were sitting right there open. The whole thread from October, all of it. Mara volunteered. Don't tell her yet. She'll cave, she always does. A breath. You didn't ruin Christmas. I think Mom's been quietly ruining yours for about 20 years and none of us ever looked at the receipts. Land safe. Send the kids a picture of a castle. Call me when you're settled. I stood there holding the phone and let the carousel go around twice before I moved. Dingle in late December turns blue dusk by 4, rain falling like a rumor, colored fishing boats knocking against the harbor wall, the exact boats from the postcard. Eileen at the bed and breakfast took one look at me and put me in the front room. You'll want the front room, she said. The sea's in it. When she heard whose granddaughter I was, she sat me by the fire and produced, within the hour, 2 neighbors and a tin of biscuits, and a story about a young Nora Brennan who'd left in a gale and wrote letters home that made the whole lane laugh. On Christmas Eve, I walked to midnight mass, candlelight, carols in an accent that sounded exactly like my grandmother reading me to sleep. Strangers shook my hand at the door and wished me a happy Christmas like they meant it personally. On Christmas Day, Eileen cooked, and I sat at a table I hadn't set, eating a dinner I hadn't planned, being asked questions nobody had thought to ask me before, and I kept half rising to clear plates out of reflex, and Eileen kept laughing and pointing me back into my chair. On my last morning there, I walked to the harbor early and set Nora's postcard down along the seawall, boats facing boats, and said the thing I'd flown 4,000 miles to say out loud. We made it, Nora, both of us. I flew home on the 28th to a full mailbox, bills, holiday cards, and one envelope in crayon. A drawing from Ava, a little airplane with a stick figure woman waving out the window, captioned Aunt Mara's trip in letters that got smaller as she ran out of room. It's framed in my office now, right beside my license. My mother didn't speak to me again until February. When she finally called, there was no apology and no mention of the cruise. She asked, stiffly, for my stuffing recipe, which, in Sandra, is roughly the equivalent of a signed peace treaty. The switchboard never quite got its monopoly back. Chelsea and I talk directly now, sister to sister, no relay, no edits. And the following Christmas, for the first time in my adult life, somebody actually asked. Chelsea called in early December. Would you want us to come by for an afternoon? Kids, cookies, we'll head out by 6. They came, they knocked, they brought cookies and they left right on time. Ava taped a brand new drawing to my refrigerator, right where a boarding pass used to hang. I hosted that afternoon because I wanted to, which it turns out, is an entirely different holiday altogether. My mother was right about exactly one thing all along. It really isn't work when it's family, as long as somebody actually asks. That's my story, one misdirected text, one email nobody believed, one boarding pass pinned to a refrigerator. If you're the person your family counts on without ever asking, let this be your sign to finally book the someday. Share this with the aunt, the sister, the daughter who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment telling me where you'd go. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.